She Rose.
I'm Sophie Hannah.
And I'm Mona. Welcome to episode 68 of Ethnically Speaking, the show where we discuss everything affecting the UK's highly melanated communities, from pop culture to current affair and everything in between. We always keep it 100 and we'll be doing the same today as we talk about the dating experiences of highly melanated women. Last year, many popular dating apps removed their ethnicity filter from their platforms in wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. Yet, many highly melanated women complain about being subjected to racial abuse or being fetishized. Do you think that the ethnicity filter is a blessing or is it a curse? How important is your partner's race in dating? And where is the line between preference, discrimination, and being exotically objectified?
So I feel very conflicted about this issue because when it comes to the ethnicity filter in dating apps, I feel that in one hand, and kind of intellectually, it feels like if you use it, you're supporting almost like a eugenicist idea that you should basically separate people by race and choose them by race, and like that therefore feeds into everything else. But on the other hand, I do kind of feel, as a veteran of such apps, that dating apps are a really superficial, very specific kind of medium. And they don't offer any information. You can't meaningfully engage with people unless you swipe right. And so because of that, I think it's quite difficult, because any decision making you're taking while you're using an app is always going to be based purely on their appearance. There's no opportunity really to get to know them or so on and so on. And so you are basically choosing a person based on really superficial factors like their height, how they look, and so on and so on. I see all the time how people basically racially profile you and ask you, the most common question I get on any dating app is, where are you from? Where's your name from? Where are your parents from? Can you make a good curry? Will you make me a curry? And so those are the kind of questions I receive. However, I get those questions whether I use the ethnicity filter or not. And sometimes, even though I think intellectually it's not the right thing to do, I do occasionally use that filter. And the reason for that is I do think that, we can read meaning into using an ethnicity filter and basically selecting a person based on a kind of almost eugenicist approach to dating apps, i.e. or dating, like, should I date with my race? I don't want to date with this race. I want to date this race. This is how I imagine my partner will be, how my children will be, if you want to go that far. But I think a dating app is, by virtue of just being something that connects people by looking at them and literally just swiping right or swiping left, it's a really superficial way of assessing people anyway, like as superficial as choosing someone based on their height or whatever other kind of marker of identity you choose that actually it's just to do with appearance. And so on that basis, I'm still conflicted. Intellectually, I think it's wrong, but in practice, I don't think it's any more harmful than all the other filters you can use to basically find a partner.
In terms of the filters, now, I see the pros and cons of both of them, of both using them and not using them, or having them and not having them. And I would like to know what the studies show now that some of these apps have taken away these filters. Like, have they seen a marked increase in people from different races or Black people being liked or swiped by different people of different ethnicities? Because Black women fare the worst on dating apps. That's what statistics show. They're the least liked, the least messages responded to, and I don't know if removing the filter is going to make men go after them anymore. I don't know if it will. Like, if you are someone who doesn't want to date someone of a different race, and I say Black women, one, because I'm Black, but also studies show like we're at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to dating. Statistically, that it's like Black women and Asian men are the least spoken to on these apps. Now, that's not when we're talking about what people would identify as typical physical features of Black people. They're happy for the features. So, if you got small waist, big bum, big breast, which isn't what every Black woman has. that's not the case, but that is what is typified as typical of a black woman's body. They're happy to have the body parts on like a white person or a white curvy girl or an Asian curvy woman or Armenian like Kim Kardashian. When it's on a black woman, then it's kind of like, I'm not too sure. So I don't know if taking away the filter is going to work. As for me, I've only ever dated black men. I've only ever wanted to date black men. And if I went on a dating app, I would probably use a filter so it was only black men that showed up in the filter, because that's who I am trying to look for. And I think that is because, one, I'm black. So those are the people that I associated with growing up in social settings, in relaxed settings, in downtime. It was black couples that I saw. It was black love that I saw. I came from a household where my father was black and my siblings were. So for me, it was it felt very natural to go and be attracted to black men. And I think I definitely felt that there was a sort of sameness there that I thought that I would get if I dated a black man, a shared understanding and experience. But I think as I've gotten older, I realized that that's probably not the case, because black is not one thing. There isn't one way to be black. So it doesn't mean that if I date a black guy, we're going to understand things. Me and my husband have very different experiences of growing up. Like, I grew up going to clubs. I was very much into like R&B, garage, all these things, and he wasn't. So I know all these songs from a certain era, word for word, ad-libs and everything, and he doesn't know them because I wasn't into that. That wasn't his experience. He was like into, well, other types of music. So it doesn't mean like blackness isn't a monolith. So I don't think that I don't think that me wanting to date black really is meaning that I'm going to meet someone who shares experiences with me. And I think that people from a different race can learn and understand your lived experience if you discuss with them, and they have to be very willing to understand that, and to cherish it and to support it and to uphold it, especially if you have children. And being black is seen as lesser than in a lot of different spheres in terms of attractiveness and probably like social standing and all these other things where people don't expect to see black people and have these negative stereotypes. So I think for me, dating a black guy has always felt not only something that I wanted to do, but if I really thought about it, probably one of the safest options as well. So yeah, that's where I kind of stand. But I got a lot more to say, but let me not commandeer, ladies.
I think this one is a really heavy one for me, I'm not going to lie. And I understand how the filters could arguably protect people. And I mean in the sense that if you're quite vocal in what you don't like, and you feel that you can be very black and white, and you engage with people who aren't your type, and you were to be very vocal about that, that's very damaging for someone's self-esteem. They could internalize a lot of hatred from that. So if you had these ethnicity filters where these people just never crossed paths, it's almost like insulating from racism, basically. So I see the benefit in that. I also understand how people feel comfortable dating within their own race for whatever reason. I see and I understand and I recognize that. Even though I don't have a type or I don't have a preference, I've dated people from different backgrounds and I'll continue to do so. I understand why people date within their community. That being said, I think that the way I view it is taking away the ethnicity filters. It should have never been there in the first place, because I think that if you look at how these ethnicity filters work, you're in some of the apps, you're not given that benefit. You have to pay for it. So to me, that's saying, have you got a bit more money? Let me show you what the luxury side is like. Let me show you how you can pick your partner. And as Sophie said, black women are the ones that suffer the most from it. So it's as if to say, the more money you have, the higher caliber you are. You don't need to mingle with people who are down here. Why don't you go up here? That's to me that's the narrative that is projected, and that really, really hurts my heart. I know that on some gay apps, I have quite a lot of gay black male friends, and they have said to me that in terms of being fetishized, it's like nothing I've ever heard before, where people have on their profile race play. So they're happy to play slave master and slave owner sexual race play stuff. They have explicit pictures of maybe like a white man with his feet on a black man's head. Disgusting things, really disgusting, because I'm not even going to class that as fetish anymore. I think it's absolutely disgusting. And the fact that these people are allowed to have this on the dating app, I think that the ethnicity filter should have never been there. And if people are so vocal to express this, take their account down, block them so they're not allowed on these dating apps anymore. Have a sign that says this is not acceptable and we're not going to tolerate this. But you giving this ethnicity filter almost says to them like, yeah, you know, whatever, because there's a very clear difference between preference, discrimination, and exotic objectification, like I said in the question. There's a very clear difference, and for some reason I don't see why the lines are starting to get a bit blurred and people are starting to give people a pat on the back and say, oh, it's okay to have a preference, it's okay to have a type. It is okay to have a preference, but if you're narrowing down people like you're flipping lunch at Just Eat, there's a problem with that. You're actually dealing with a human being, and if you think that you would cancel out a whole race based on the color of their skin, I think that is very toxic. And if we look at the users who use dating apps, I mean, regardless of whether you're an impressionable age or not, everyone's got feelings, and that hurts. To be told that you're less desirable, to be felt as othered, to be seen as less than someone else, that's horrible. It's really, really horrible. For people to be vocal about it on top of that, it gets me really, really angry. And like I'm saying, if we look at the users of dating apps and their age, you're looking at late teens. And I mean, you've got young teens on here, because to clarify the age of someone, they don't even really do it properly. You've just got to lie about your date of birth. The age of people who are going on this, so young. And I hear conversations. I actually had one of my friends recently who said that her cousin wanted to go on Hinge, and she's Indian. And she said to my friend, I'm open to dating white guys now. I've only dated Indian men before, but I'm open to dating white guys. But do you think that white guys would be open to dating me? And my friend said, well, to be honest with you, you're very fair and you don't really look Indian. You look a little bit exotic enough to have that J-Lo vibe, but not too much where it would raise eyebrows as to be like, oh, you're a bit foreign. So you can pass. So you will go on these apps and you will be fine for the white man. And I just think in my head, as much as I know this is conversations that happen in ethnic communities, doesn't make me any less sick to my stomach that people are on these dating apps and selecting these ethnicity filters to block certain people out. That's blatant racism. I'm not going to have it that as preference. I think it's racism.
Do you know what? There's so much that you said and so much that I agree with, Mona. One thing that you said, though, that I would probably challenge a bit is that you think that there's a clear difference between preference and discrimination. And I'm not even sure if there is anymore, to be honest. I'm just really not sure if there is. Because where do these preferences come from? Like, I read this article and it was saying culture builds preference. So when people say my preference is like, you will see a lot... When proximity to whiteness is seen as the most attractive thing, and then you see people dating according to that. I was reading the book Slay in Your Lane. It's called like the Black Girl's Bible, and it was saying that 1/3 of white people, I think they were talking about in Britain, said that they wouldn't date outside their race. But then when you flip that over to like black people, then it's like was it 1 in 10 said they would, or something like that. And when you have a kind of proximity to whiteness that is held up as the best and the most attractive, and then you see people dating towards that, I don't know if we can say it's preference and not an innate discrimination that we have internalized as people the world over. Because when you see people on these dating websites, I also read another book called Stephanie Yeboah. She's she would call herself a fat influencer, self-titled fat influencer. And when you don't fit into regular clothing sizes on the high street, your attractivity seems to go way down, because people who are fat, and I'm using that in the way that people do in terms of owning and reclaiming the word, they're not seen as equally as attractive as somebody who is probably like a size 10 or 12 or 6 or 8. And when we think about our social circles, how many people in our social circles actively go out and try to date people who are outside of standardized high street clothing? In my friendship circles, I'm going to tell you, it's very, very rare. But to have this kind of slim ideal, to have this idea where I've seen lots of dark-skinned men that I know, friends that I know, who will only date light-skinned women. And their mums are dark-skinned, their sisters are dark-skinned, and they won't go near a dark-skinned woman. So, and they'll be like, oh, it's just preference. It's just preference. You know, I date slim women because it's a preference. Some of this is not preference. It's discrimination because of a beauty ideal that we are told is the pinnacle of beauty. We internalize it, and then this is what it is that we're looking for. That's why women are constantly on a diet trying to stay thin, because we're told that if we're overweight, it's not attractive. And then also it will probably affect the people and the men that you attract because of the size that you are. So I think it really is underlined by biases, all of this attractiveness that goes on in the world. So yeah, I don't know if the line between preference and discrimination is very clear nowadays, if I'm being honest.
I agree with that a lot, because similar to what you're saying, but almost the flip side about your friends, like dark-skinned men who will only date light women. I have a few female Asian friends growing up who their boyfriends were white, and so two of my really, really good friends dated white men for maybe 5, 6, 7 years, and the entire time they had to keep it secret from their Indian families because it was just like untenable. And one time one of their families did discover about this boyfriend that this girl had been dating for 7 years, and it was, you know, her life was over. She had to break up with him. Her family didn't speak to her for ages, and so on and so on and so on. And so I suppose like we're viewing this debate from the point of view of, I guess, dating apps, like this idea that a lot of people subconsciously aspire to be this European beauty ideal. But I think there's also the flip side of that, which is within our different cultural communities as well. It's maybe even stronger, and perhaps it's stronger because people feel protective towards like their own communities and almost as a reaction to that. But it works both ways. And I feel like for myself, I mean, actually, through a dating app, I did once date a half Sri Lankan, but it was very unsuccessful. But I don't really have like a particular racial category. Like my dad is white, my mom is dark-skinned Sri Lankan. So I obviously don't have like a specific category that I fit into. My family, in that sense, would obviously encourage me to date outside the races. They both did as well. But I don't know. I think it's this thing where we're viewing, as I kind of said earlier, like I think we're viewing a dating app as a microcosm for society, but actually the dating app doesn't really have that much influences over preferences and biases and discriminatory tendencies that we already have, without really realizing it. And so there was one like interesting argument, which was there was this black woman who was talking about on dating apps, the ethnicity filter actually gives her back agency in the sense that it means that, you know, when white people talk about dating, ethnicity filters should not be a thing. It's actually kind of an action that really represents white privilege. It's because they don't have to. And actually being able to filter in that sense, if you're from a minority group, puts the power back in your hands. And so it's also like reclaiming your identity and actually the people you want to see in, for example, in white majority culture. You know, if you're not those aren't the people you necessarily want to meet, but they're also the people that are going to they're going to undermine you being on the app. So I'm saying a lot of things, but I think it does work more than one way in the sense of who is discriminating against who and what the app actually represents within that big debate.
I think you've touched on a lot of fair points there, Nishi, and same with you, Sophie. And I think that in terms of the differentiation between preference and discrimination, preference comes under an umbrella of things. Like, I'm a tall woman and I would prefer to date somebody who was taller than me. If you look at my backlog, I've got people yay high who I've been on dates with and stuff, because I prefer someone who's taller than me, right? But that doesn't mean that whoever comes my way, I'm going to shut them off because they don't hit that tick box. A person is a person. I'm open to whatever. I would just prefer someone who's taller than me. when we come to talk about the shades of someone's skin, you definitely have that influence of white supremacy. And I can only talk about the Black community, which I associate with. However, there is a lot of communities, Arab, Asian, South American, etc. There is anti-Blackness within these communities. Being whiter is being seen as better. So even within those communities, we have people who would shun Black races, Black women in particular. And then within our own community, you then have that same concept that's being perpetuated back into our community. So I think for me, there does seem to be a difference between preference and discrimination, because if you are an educated person, you are able to understand, of course you have preferences, of course you might like things, but would you go to the extent to only run after one thing and shun off everything else? That is discrimination, because you could prefer, I don't know, when it comes to skin tones and stuff, the whole colorism, it doesn't sit right with me. And I think what really grinds my gears is that having this ethnicity filter, it gives people a false sense of reality, because day to day, especially living in a cosmopolitan city, you come across so many different cultures. You don't have the luxury to erase people on the tube and block them out in your head. You see different diversities, you see different cultures, but to be given that power online and for you to be able to say, I only want to see white faces, I only want to see Black faces. And I tell you what, you can agree to disagree. I think it's different within the communities. I think because living in the Western world, where you are forced to conform to Western standards of beauty, seeing representation of Black love is powerful. It's a movement and it's needed. So I understand in terms of ethnics why they feel they would prefer to date within their race. Because when it's force fed down your throat that you're not beautiful, when you see in your partner, it's basically giving a middle finger. So I see that. When it comes to the white community, that's where I have a problem. Because like I said, being able to reinforce that standard of beauty is the standard that everybody should conform to. And if you don't, you can erase human beings from that. That's what I don't agree with. There's nothing wrong with going on an app and not being attracted to a certain man. And it's not because he's a Black man, he's just not attractive. But somebody told me that even though they've erased the ethnicity filter, it works on algorithm. So if you continuously swipe no to somebody, that the app is able to pick up that algorithm and tell what you like. So in a way, we've gotten rid of the ethnicity filters, but it's still there. Do you know what I mean? There's still that little subtle thing where you're able to manipulate it and have it work in your favor.
Do you know what? You're so right, Mona. And I think that's one thing that I wanted to talk about today. And I don't really know how to really approach it in terms of, I think the ethnicity filter, I personally feel, like you said, when it's maybe like white majority British, because we live in Britain, who are using it to keep out any races, is different from people from an ethnicity who are looking to connect with people who they only see white faces on the app and they're like, I want to see more people who look like me. But I don't know if that's a sort of racism to say, you know, well, it's fine for ethnic minorities to do it, but it's not fine for white people. And I think for people from a white background, it does feel kind of different, because every other race generally in society is seen as lesser than, with Black at the bottom. So when they're kind of sifting it out, for me, it kind of has this sort of racial undertone of, you know, I don't want to mix with other people. But that could be just my opinion. And I think even within myself, I've had to tackle inherent forms of racism that I've swallowed and digested and have come out in my preferences. Because when I was younger, like a teenager, up until about the age of probably like 20, I was like, oh, I just want a light-skinned guy, preferably if he had like green eyes and all this stuff. And that stuff is just racism. It's just inherent racism. And I think that's when I have an issue, when I have heard men, and not just Black men. I'm not coming after Black men. I love Black men. I love Black men. I've dated Black men. I'm married to a Black man. If God blesses me, I'll have a Black son. Like, I love Black men. But because that's the community that I'm in, maybe it's I've heard some things more than I would in other communities. Because I've heard guys talk about dark-skinned guys talk about they only date light-skinned women. You know, even when they walk in the women into a room, they shine. Like, you can see them because they're so bright. Like, obviously you're attracted to that. And just stuff that is just like, that is insanely racist. And black men
That's
who
the
will come
coon
up with
mentality, Sophie. That's the coon mentality.
and it's just stuff like, you know, all these just men, anybody who doesn't date someone from their community is always very suspicious to me. And I mean, as in they never would. As in, I just don't find anyone from my background attractive. For me, I'm like, that's weird. Because unless you were adopted and you grew up in a completely different ethnicity than you might have, you know, like Madonna's children or whatever, then to grow up with people who look like you, who share a shade with you and all these things, and you're like, I don't want to go anywhere near them. Give me any other race apart from that one. For me, I'm like, there are issues that person is dealing with, and I have heard men from different races and ethnicities say that, and it makes me so sad, because I'm just like, what you need to tackle is the racism, because you don't hear that from other people. You don't hear white people being so just like, I couldn't date someone from my race. It'd be like dating my sister. It doesn't make any sense to me. So there was an article that said, when you're looking for attraction, what role does whiteness play in who am I attracted to? And I think it's a question that anybody from any race needs to ask themselves. Like, what is that doing? Because it's having an effect on us. It's having an effect on us. And it just pains me when I see some of my dark-skinned friends struggling to find somebody, and the first thing they think of is maybe it's my skin tone. Like, maybe that's the reason why, because all my lighter friends are matched up or in relationships. And yeah.
It's a heavy one.
It really is.
And it's sad. And I think the fact that these types of conversations are being geared in a way where people are given a pass because they're just saying, oh, you know, it's just preference. Just reiterating what you said, Sophie. If you love yourself and your self-confidence is yay high, you look in the mirror and you say, I like my height, I like the way I talk, I like my accent, I like my mind, I like my skin. If everything you like on yourself, you wouldn't peel off and put on a female and celebrate it, then you don't like yourself. You don't like yourself, because I don't see how that makes sense. And within the Black community is one of the only communities that I have ever heard two people share the same skin color and have to ask, I wonder if he goes for me because I'm Black, even though he is Black himself. That's very warped to me. I don't understand. And my friend was also saying to me that even in the Punjabi culture, being compared as white as a rose and as fair and having fair skin tones, it puts you up the ranks. And the darker you are, is the harder it might be for a woman to get married, etc., etc. But if you hear my language, we're talking about women. For the men, it's a bit different. There's a privilege between the men and the women. There's a discrepancy in the sexes. And that also gets on my nerves too, because they seem to benefit off it. So yeah, this whole situation, it really grinds my gears, because I feel like people dance around the subject, but they don't want to get to the nub of the issue. And as you said, Sophie, it's just people need to face up to their own racism, their own colorism, their own deep-rooted issues, the proximity to white supremacy. They really need to face these issues, because I don't actually think it's going anywhere. And with these things like the ethnicity filters, I think it's just on the rise, in my opinion. I don't think it's getting any better.
So do you guys think that if you want to date outside of your race, so I don't mean if you have like vowed never to date, I don't mean someone who like hates their own race and doesn't want to date within it, but say like say an Asian person put on their dating app that they only wanted to date Black men, for example, would that be, in your mind, would that be discrimination, fetishization, or racism, or would it actually just be having a preference? So I'm just curious, but in terms of two minorities rather than white versus brown or whatever it might be.
Do you know what? That's really interesting. I'll speak. I'll try and be quick.
I'm asking for a friend.
I think that's a really interesting question, because as much as I have always gone for Black men, or Black men have always gone for me, I've never really thought that men of other races found me attractive. To this day, I probably still stand on that. It has never upset me, because I want a Black man. So I have never been upset if I'm standing in a bar with friends who are white and there's only white guys and no one approaches me, because I'm just like, I don't think I'm your type, so whatever. But then I had a friend who is dark skinned, she like comes from Jamaica, and she's a big girl and she only dates white guys. And she was saying white men do find you attractive. It's the places that you're going, they're not going to approach you on the street. You know, like black men will come up to you on the road and be like, oh, excuse me, miss, can I just... She was just like, white men don't do that. Like, it's a very different vibe. And I was just like, oh, but... So I don't even know. So for me, what I'm trying to say is I would never have put into my dating profile black men only. But that's because I would assume that men from other races wouldn't even want to approach me. I just never would think it. And I would never put it in even if I did think white men would, because I feel I wouldn't want to, as much as I would want to date black men, if there was a guy from another race and I found him attractive, I'd be like, okay, I'll have a little conversation. Let me see. So when people put black only or this only, I think we are crossing into discrimination and exotic objectification, because when you're saying black only, or I only like Asian women, or I only like Chinese women or stuff, is every Chinese woman the same? When it's like, oh, I just love Chinese women, I only date Chinese women because they're all the same. They've all got the same characteristics. Like, for me, I'm like, that idea is nonsensical. So I would probably say it's best not to put it into your profile, because you never know. You might find someone else from another race or ethnicity very attractive, and you never know what might happen.
I think...
Do you guys think that would be the same? So I guess this is a slightly different question, but if you took, like, I agree with you, you can't say all Asians or whatever it might be are the same. But say if a person had a preference, I guess this is less to do with an app, because it wouldn't be on an app, but in life. Say if you said, okay, I'm really interested in people who come from like this community in this country, and it was quite a lot more like culturally specific in the sense that it was related to stuff outside of like superficial skin color. Would that be as bad?
I think...
Or would that be more logical?
I think it really depends on intention and the reasons as to why you identify as only liking this certain race. Because I think that's a very, very narrow-minded mentality. And I know there's going to be some people who say, but I only date so-and-so and I only date so-and-so. And I'm not saying that people don't do that, but I think people need to go back and do a lot of internal work, because what the example you gave about two different ethnicities coming together, I don't believe that brownness equates to wokeness. I don't believe that. You can be brown, you can be ethnic, and you can be sleeping. You could be in a relationship where you are fetishizing another ethnic person who you're dating, or you could be being fetishized yourself. And because you know you are not emotionally intelligent enough to be able to pick up on that, you're sleeping, and you are perpetuating the narrative of what we are talking about being exotically objectified. You can be Asian man, Indian man, and be dating a black woman and be talking about twerking and asking stupid questions that are related to race. That's just a stereotype. That's why I'm saying brownness doesn't equate to wokeness. I think coming from a culture where there is more similarities that unite you than divide you, this is again my preference, arguably tend to break down some of that objectification, because there seems to be a similar background there. But again, I think it just comes down to the intention, because if you only date a certain type of race, you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? Because everyone is an individual. So to just simplify somebody as, oh, well, I just seem to date women from Thailand because they seem to be very peaceful. Have you dated every single woman from Thailand? No, you haven't. And what is it about the Thai culture that you want in your woman that couldn't be found in other cultures?
Girl, you're so right. I think all of it needs breaking down. I can't talk about myself anymore because I'm not actively looking for someone to date, but it's advice that I would give to myself if I ever, if my husband died and I became single. Like, why am I attracted to the men that I'm attracted to? Like, You know, and I think everybody does. If you're saying I only like a certain size woman, she needs to be within this size. If they have to be a certain height, if they have to be a certain shade, if, you know, they have to have a certain type of job, if they can only have natural hair, if they can only have a long weave, if they could, like all these things, you need to really get down to the core of why is it this is what I'm attracted to, and to really think about it. Because one thing that really I have seen, especially with people who have an issue with their own skin tone, and then they will date people who are lighter than them, men or women, because they are trying to, you know, that's what they feel like the proximity that they want to. You have no idea what those children could look like. That's the thing about being of any race, especially being Black. When two tones come together, you have no clue what your child is going to look like. That's why the royal family was worried about Archie. You never know. It could be a throwback. It could just happen. And my thing is, when you have these children now and you have these own internalized issues that you have about your own race, and your child could be dark as you, and you know they're a boy or a girl, and you're now going to have to teach them how to love themselves and to have worth when you don't have it because you have been trying to escape to a certain extent in the people that you date, then it's a harmful situation. So people really need to think about this and what they're going to be passing on to like their children if they have children with somebody who they only date specifically that type of person, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I think just to like round off my final thoughts, we're so far gone in how we navigate the world. Segregating people and categorizing people is such an archaic view to me. Instead, we should just be embracing. And I think narrowing people down to their skin color, the shape of their hips, what they can get from certain races, and having the privilege to choose what's possible for you. I just think that it's not something that we should be trying to indulge in. It's something that we should actively be trying to push out. But I could speak about this for 101 years, but I won't. So thank you to everyone for watching and listening to Ethnically Speaking. Let's keep the conversation going. What's your experiences been like in the dating world as a highly melanated woman? Let us know in the comments below. For a summary of everything we've spoken about today, head on over to unitedmelaningroup.com/ESO68. There'll be a link in the description below. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. We'll see you on Wednesday, where we'll talk about holiday allowance and the rise of the 4-day working week. You don't want to miss out. But until then, wear your masks, wash your hands, and most of all, keep safe.